You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, Deacon Gerard-Marie Anthony and Melissa Rihl, members of Bishop Burbidge's Advisory Council on Racism, discuss racism in America and how we should respond as Catholics.
We have to be able to start with ourselves and to recognize where are those places in my own heart that need conversion first, and then within my family, and then within my community. And it is, because it's not going to be a political thing. It's going to be a conversion of the heart.
Here, Deacon Anthony and Melissa share their personal experiences and how we can bring about real change in our communities as we seek to live in peace together as children of God. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer of the Diocese.
Deacon and Melissa, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So we've got with us Deacon Gerard-Marie Anthony and Melissa Rihl. All right, I got that one right. Let's start by just talking about Deacon. Where do you serve in ministry, and what's your professional background?
So I'm at St. Timothy's Catholic Church out in Chantilly. I call us the Dulles Airport Parish for people that are looking. I am the director of religious education out there, and I also work with moms that have had miscarriages, as well as I work with the poor in Alexandria at the Mother of Light Center.
Wonderful. And you've been on the podcast before, so I appreciate you returning. Obviously, It wasn't too bad of an experience. You're back. That or you're a glutton for punishment, either one. So. Melissa, talk about what you do.
I'm the director of youth ministry at St. Leo the Great. So I work with middle school, 6th through 12th grade, high school. And I also volunteer as one of the leaders for Gabriel Project over
Very
there.
cool.
So.
Very cool. How long have you been in youth ministry?
I've been there since 2012.
Wow, great.
It's been a long time.
Very good. Still enjoying it, I see.
Yes.
And you've got a great program there also.
Yeah.
So we're here to discuss a serious topic. Bishop Burbidge has established an advisory council on racism, so obviously taking on that issue. You're not going to try to solve all the problems of the world, but say, okay, what can locally we do to be light, to be salt in our society and in our culture, especially on this issue, and be leaven within the church itself. So you're both serving on that advisory council. So first, thank you for doing that. It's quite an undertaking, but an important one. First, let me ask the question. Deacon, we'll start with you. Why did you agree to join that council? What was it you were maybe hoping to accomplish through it?
I was hoping to bring peace. I'm very relational, and I can see the discord that's coming about because of this issue. So I wanted to be able to bring people together, blacks, whites, Latinos, everybody, so that we can all live as children of God. So that was my aim. I want to be able to bring peace rather than hatred in the community.
Very good. Melissa, what was your reasoning?
Well, I was asked, it was interesting because I didn't seek it out, but it was an answer to a prayer that I had been kind of silently making of, what can I do? What can I say? I think my biggest hope, especially being a representative that works with young people so regularly, is to have some of those answers for young people on how do we respond? What can we do? In a similar way, we need Jesus.
Yeah.
So being able to be a voice of calm and reason in the community, I think is something I'm hoping for.
Yeah, and you make a good point about with working with Youth One. It's like, what is the answer? And what's tragic is we've been asking that question for a long time, and parents have been struggling with that. Youth directors have been struggling with that for decades, and this longer than that, obviously. But certainly since the Civil Rights Movement, is like, what can we do, and what are the answers that we can have? And it seems like the answers aren't going to come from the political sphere, which is unfortunately where this issue has kind of been owned for at least a little while. Yeah. And how can we provide some spiritual answers? So Deacon, as people of faith, where do we start in understanding the issue? So kind of taking the political context out of it. Yeah. How do we understand the issue as a starting point to moving forward?
Well, I think what you've said is important, not just looking at it as a political issue, but looking at it from the perspective that we're all children of God.
Yeah,
that is crucial, because oftentimes, if we just start looking at that person and labeling them, then we miss that image of God in them. But if you can see Christ in the person you're talking to, regardless of their race, then you can love them. So I think we have to start with the standpoint of love, and then we can start building and establishing relationships.
Yeah, Melissa, what do you think of it in terms of that starting point in a discussion?
Yeah, agreed. You really have to know who you are as a child of God first. And, Mother Teresa talks about starting with your family. And, with this whole with the struggles that we have, especially in America, people are so quick to point the finger, to label, as you were saying, like, and so it really is something where we have to be able to start with ourselves and to recognize where are those places in my own heart that need conversion first, and then within my family, and then within my community. And it is because it's not going to be a political thing. It's going to be a conversion of the heart. That's going to change this, because racism, there's roots beneath it. You know, you look at the all of the 7 deadly sins, like those are the things that are beneath that. It's not just like, racism, check the box. That's, what are those things that are kind of like underneath all of that?
Yeah, and it seems to emanate, like, so I'm from the South mostly. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but spent most of my life in North Carolina. So you experience these kinds of attitudes at times at varying degrees. And I never met someone who I felt like was an emotionally and spiritually sound person that had a racist attitude or belief. There was a brokenness that seems to be there that begins that. Like, why would you think of somebody else as less than a child of God, as being equal in their deserving of the dignity and worth and all that? There has to be a brokenness there. So I think a lot of times the conversation starts with the impact of racism rather than kind of a source of it, and that's a spiritual wound. And again, politics can only react to what's happening in culture, and if in culture and in society we're appropriately addressing the issues, there isn't as much need on the political end to solve a problem that isn't there. So you kind of we have to reverse engineer it seems, right, and kind of start, and we're a better place than within the church. And I think at councils like this, I know Bishop Burbidge has said it many times, how grateful he is that there are so many people willing to serve on it, because he needs that counsel. Well, how do we then start in our parishes and discuss it and then be productive? He doesn't just want some ideas that are great ideas that sit on a shelf, is the way he puts it. We don't want to be dusting this thing off ever. We want it to be kind of an active part of how we think and who we are, because it's not that divorced from the way we talk about the unborn, or the way we talk about the immigrant, or the way we talk about anybody. You mentioned mothers, single mothers with children, like all these people who might feel stigmatized at times. Like, this is the same underlying theology that should be reinforcing it. So that's certainly a good starting place. The advisory council is how many members?
14.
Yeah, 14. And they're all African American, but obviously the issue of racism doesn't just address impact African Americans. Talk a little bit about how the council will be working with, like, the Hispanic apostle and so on, to make sure that all races are considered and their voices are heard in these proposals.
Well, I think one of the things that the council ideally wants to do, because this was in our meeting, they were talking about just talking with others. And I think when we talk with people, one of the things we have to aim for is not just like contacting them, but connecting with them. One of the things, and I think this is crucial, you can talk with somebody, you can hear their words, but it doesn't mean you're actually listening to them. In order to actually hear their words, what we have to do is we have to add a different letter, one letter to the end, the T. Take in what they're saying. And if you add that T, you get heart. And when you have heart-to-heart conversations, even tough conversations where people won't necessarily agree with everything, that's when you can start building dialogue and starting friendships, solidifying relationships. Because it's hard to be angry and to hate the person that you actually have a real relationship with. So having opportunities to be able to actually connect with people and not just contact them, I think that's crucial, and I think our advisory board is going to work towards that.
Yeah, Melissa, talk about the importance of, like, truly listening. Obviously working with young people, they know if you're really listening or not.
They know what's authentic and what's not.
So your role obviously is broader than just about young people, but talk about the importance of that kind of true listening.
I mean, communication is just so essential. I mean, a personal example, this summer, obviously I'm not dark. I'm very light because I'm interracial.
Okay.
And so my family, my mom is black, my dad is white. I have 3 other siblings, and we all are different shades. And over the summer, when everything kind of got intense, we had to have essentially like a family come to Jesus Zoom call, because we're all over the country. But because my siblings and I all had very different experiences with everything. And even within our own family, having to sit and have that dialogue of like actually listening and hearing like, oh, you have had a very different experience than I have. And I did not understand that because I never took the time to ask.
Yeah.
And so I think along the lines of communication, like Deacon was saying, it's not just a matter of listening, but that dialogue, because, it's even more than, with young people in general. I mean, you look at millennials, like everyone's on Instagram all the time. Mm-hmm. And, when everything broke, it was like, I'm going to post a black square. I'm going to, I'm just going to write my solidarity with people. And I had friends over the summer who just, they were like radio silent. And then they were like, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. I'm like, you have nothing to apologize for. Like, just talk to me.
Yeah.
Just ask questions. And that's, I think, really what it comes down to. We can't just post things and say like, oh yeah, I had a conversation over Instagram chat. No, you did not have a conversation.
Yeah,
right.
No,
the comment battles, no.
Yeah, there are character limits on conversations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but I mean, part of that too is because when this all happened with the pandemic, like we're not able to really sit down.
Yeah.
And so many people connected online. But I mean, even if it's FaceTime or Zoom or whatever, to be able to sit down, like the three of us sitting here in a conversation, I can see your face,
right?
And I can hear what you're saying and take it in, and facial expressions way more than reading somebody's like saga.
Yeah, the hashtag.
Oh my
like
gosh,
that.
yeah.
I mean, and I know, just kind of building on that, a lot of the couples that I've met with as a deacon, they may be interracial couples, and they're going through tremendous trauma right now.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like I had one couple where they were saying like, oh, I think that the kids was saying my dad is racist because he's a cop. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily true. And I mean, kids are getting mad at their parents, husbands are getting mad at their wives, wives are getting mad at their husbands and their kids. And it's all because it's like they're looking at this kind of social dialogue without connecting it, or like a social narrative, without connecting it to the divine narrator, who is Christ. I mean, you've known your family for all these years, and you're saying like, oh, now you've changed because there's a new label that's coming out, or a new narrative. But it's like, no, that's your mom, that's your dad. Let's have this conversation. And like you were saying, they have different experiences. But at the same time, if you take in the person's experiences, you can see where they're coming from, a lot of misunderstandings are dissolved. And that's where that hatred can start.
And healing too.
Yeah,
exactly. Just from like the subtle like judgments that people have of like, oh, well, they must have an easier time because they look white. Well, no.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but those are kind of presuppositions that are often brought to the topic, right? Yeah. It's like let's have an open conversation, but here's the starting points that you have to agree to. It's like, well, that's not really an open conversation, and like let them get their point across at least, and kind of hear them out. It seems like one of the challenges, it seems like, in the kind of the cultural conversation is the idea of systemic racism, because it creates an intangible where we're not looking at like actions that are racist and addressing that with an individual who might have done it. Mm-hmm. It's that everybody's kind of potentially guilty, like you said. They feel like they should apologize. You're like, you didn't do anything. What are you apologizing for? It does seem like that is maybe a stopping point for some people in feeling open to be involved but I don't want to draw attention to myself because there's already this like, okay, who are the bad guys? Yeah. We don't really know until someone's done something. So how do we change that? Like, is it helpful to think in terms of systemic racism? Do we look at singular acts and say, okay, when that happens, we need to address it as Christians, as Catholics, and with mercy and justice, but like, how do we balance the need to understand kind of the systemic side and just maybe focus on actions as they come up?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. It's racism is not just like, we can't just be like, this is the thing. Like, racism is the sin that we like. No, what are the underlying things? Because we like sometimes, where people grew up, family, generational wounds, a very real thing. Life experiences, where you live, where you work. Chicago is going to be very different than, those experiences can be different than Arlington, Virginia, or, like LA or New York. And, as Catholics, like that's why it's so important that we have that sacramental life and the confession and a good examination of conscience, because to just label things like, is that racist or not racist? Like, that's going to be really hard to then identify that, because it's just all these big buzzwords, and really needs to go back to like the person and Jesus.
Does that mean that the answers become local? Because we talk about we need a national conversation. I don't know too many national conversations that happen, because, like you said, people in Chicago are going to have a very different kind of starting point and thought process than someone in, Biloxi or someone in Tampa. It's like that conversation's hard. Like, is what the advisory council is doing basically kind of like a model from the start, in that it's a localized conversation addressing localized experiences?
I think you have to start small at the micro level, because we're incarnational people. We look at the person. Jesus came individually for each one of us. And I think sometimes, like, if you try to just go by the buzzwords and you're focusing just on the sin, you miss the person.
Yep.
And I mean, and if you're focused just on the evil or the sin, it's what one of my friends used to call dialoguing with the devil, because you're just focusing on the lack of good rather than the person who is good. God says, looked at man and woman and said, you are very good. That's our dignity, our personalistic norm. And if you don't recognize that and you just focus in on what's going wrong or what's bad with the person, you miss them. One of my favorite quotes is from John Paul II. He says, you are not the sum total of your faults and failings. You are the beloved of God. And we have to see other people like that, because that's how God sees them. And in heaven, that's how we should see each other. So let's start doing heaven here on earth. So focus on the good. And that means having that local conversation and not just saying, okay, yeah, well, this is it, you know.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very good. We had an event addressing the topic of racism recently, and the speaker made an interesting point that I'd like your reaction to. He said that basically, you know, there was a change in racism from what we experienced in the civil rights movement of the 60s to what we have now. He basically says it's like changed or even like mutated. Do you feel that that's the case? Has it kind of like changed over time to bring us to where we are? Or do you think it's kind of been consistent throughout?
Well, I think a mutation kind of happens like when something changes, and sometimes it looks so different you don't even recognize the original. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that's at the heart, kind of what Melissa was saying, is it's the sin of hatred, pride, and envy. That's what's mutating. So now, instead of people getting upset about, like, say, just the color of your skin, people now are getting upset because of things like political affiliation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, you say, hey, Donald Trump, or I'm a Democrat, people start losing their minds. You see people getting upset when they're saying, hey, you didn't see this correctly. I mean, you're privileged. But you don't see, and all of this is kind of a mutation of labeling, of hatred. But that comes out. How do we defeat that? I'd say labeling, actually, it's one of those things where if we keep doing it, we've labeled so much stuff that we lose sight of what's actually on the inside of the box. Yeah, we're focused on the wrapping rather than what the actual gift is, and that gift is the person.
And racism is so unique too, because race doesn't carry with it character, it doesn't carry with it moral beliefs, it doesn't carry with it all these other things. So, like, while there are certain things you know by somebody's party affiliation or by, you know, some of their interests or whatever, you can look at their Facebook page and kind of maybe get a feel for what they're like. Race is like kind of void of some of those things, because there's no two black people with the same ideas about everything, right?
Yeah.
And like that's where it seems like it's almost even more sinister, is that we take other areas where we do have understandings of people, we kind of group them real quick, and when you do it to race, that's like in like almost an even worse level of kind of categorizing but dehumanizing, in a sense, to where now they're just what I think of them, not who they really are. That's interesting.
And I think part of that too, you know, you look at our culture and it's so easy to have like stereotypes, whether it be of Hispanic, Asian, Black, and you see it in the movies and TV shows. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you've got this like this confusion of, you know, like, oh, well, let's just make those assumptions that everybody of this race is like this, and then you look at your neighbor. And you know, because we are what we consume, right? So from the music, from the media, and that's why also it's just so important to be aware of like, what are we filling ourselves with, and where do we spend our time? Like, are we spending as much time praying and being before Jesus, you know, than like on the Instagram feed or, you know, Netflix or whatever. Right. And I've been reflecting a lot on that lately, you know, just various shows that have, I think, kind of impacted society too. Yeah,
entertainment certainly has, I think, a role in it. I think as much as we don't like to think of it, like the way movies and TV portray things, you spend enough time with anything, it's going to kind of start to impact your thinking. So same with Jesus. If you spend enough time in front of him, you might start sounding a little bit like him, right?
Yeah, that's the goal.
That's the goal. Yeah, with a little bit of luck, we just might get there. So, someone in my position, so obviously being, my family's Scotch-Irish, so, we're not in a kind of in a minority category. How can someone who's not a minority approach these issues without feeling like you're going to get attacked? Like, what's the kind of the best way if they did want to have that conversation, like you said your friend did with you, or like what would you recommend to them? Like, what would be your advice for someone who feels trepidatious but interested, like they want to do good and they want to contribute? Like, what's the best way for them to kind of approach the situation?
Well, I think one of the best ways to start off with is to pray to be, quote, brave. Yeah. Sometimes, and I mean, when I have these conversations, a lot of times people come up to me at the parish and they're like, "Hey, Deacon, can I talk to you for a second?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And usually, like, if they start with the low voice and something, you can tell. They're you're like, "Okay,
really
what's
nervous.
going on? Yeah, what's going on?"
It's a universal tone.
Yeah. It's like, but I think one of the things that we have to do, especially like, say, for example, as a Black person, God says in 1 John, it says, "And this is love, that God has loved us first." Sometimes we have to take the initiative. Yep. And I mean, and just say, "Hey, look, okay, you look nervous." Like when like, say, couples or people come into me, and I usually can kind of tell this is going to be a conversation about something that's uncomfortable. So I say, hey, let me get you some water. Let's talk about this. Taking initiative to love, that is something that's very key. But also to put them at ease, start off with something that you kind of have in common. A lot of times, like, we talked about football or even sports or family life. I joke if they have kids with them, I'll start talking with their kids. I get something to get them to open up. That's something that's crucial. And then once you actually can get them talking, you have to know that most people aren't going to just kind of spill their guts, at the beginning of it. But if they know that you see them as a person and not just as I'm white or you're not white or something like that, they can slowly start opening up. So I would say the thing that we need to do, honestly, start having relationships. I mean, that's the key. I mean, because you can open up to like your best friend, your spouse, people that you trust. But you're not going to kind of just open up if you're not only seeing them not just as a stranger, but as the enemy. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to open your heart up to that. You have to be able to take the time to be present. That's the key. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of these conversations. It's easy to flash a 200, character thing. And then all of a sudden, you're like, "Oh, yeah, I've done my part," kind of like what you're saying. But it takes bravery, and it also takes love to be able to sit there and be with someone, even if you disagree with them. I have, when I was in the Legion of Mary, as you know, you may not know, but I was the Regia president, and I worked with Koreans, Africans, French-speaking Africans, Latinos, Vietnamese, all of them. I mean, so many different cultures. But they were all comfortable around me. Why? Because I took the time to actually be with them. Mm-hmm. I would drive down to some of our old stomping grounds in North Carolina just to be with councils. And that meant a lot to them. When people know that you're invested in them as a person and not just using them for, whatever the thing is, that's when they open up. That's why people come to me, sometimes from across the diocese. They come to St. Tim's to talk to me. They're like, "Wow, Deacon, I've heard that you'll listen to me. You'll allow me to come into the darkness, and you'll be able to meet me with light." That's what people want. Nobody wants to be bad, but they want to know that they're loved unconditionally. And if they know that, then they can start open up, and then they'll have honest conversations with you, and then you can walk together, and that's wonderful.
Yes.
Wow, what a great answer.
Yeah. I think the only thing I'd add on to that, with that dialogue, knowing that like while you're listening to somebody that you're not like coming up with a defense,
Yeah.
like listening, but like ready to have the comeback or whatever. And, but I mean, on both sides, reaching, like you were saying, being able to reach out and, have that conversation, as uncomfortable, as little, as much as it may be. It's just so important. Yeah.
So as we look ahead, when you the conversation you guys are having right now and the insights you're sharing with me gives me a great feeling of peace and hope that, there is a productive path forward. We don't see that in that political sphere. But so when you look forward to this and you realize that that conversation, that political, debate is going to impact, the way, the people that you're interacting with, the counsel that you offer the bishop is going to be in the context of what's happening outside of our initiatives here. Where do you find hope? Like, where do you look and say, the work of this advisory council is going to be productive in our diocese, and here's why? What is that for you?
Well, I think there's two things that I find hope in. First, we can find hope in knowing that God's in control. I mean, it's like,
I'm just going to second that right now.
Yeah.
Amen.
But I mean, and it's somewhat neat. The reason that I think we can find hope in that, and I think that sounds sometimes like a quote Catholic answer, but I mean, if you really are seeing people with God's eyes, you can see, like, even if you have to go through something that's really tough, we're gonna make it through. I mean, we're gonna make it through if we do it with God's love. I also think there's hope because we're actually talking about these things in a constructive way. Like, I mean, sometimes the tough conversations are, hard to have. But if we're actually talking about them, it means that we're actually taking a step forward. But to be able to say, yes, here we go, this is tough, but I'm with you. And the more people that can come together, that's the stronger our bond will be. So that's where I can find hope in that.
Very good.
And I think, something that was very beautiful to see is you have a lot of people around the diocese that they do have a great heart and a great, passion for wanting to bring the faith out into the world, into our diocese, to our brothers and sisters who maybe aren't Catholic or are fallen away Catholic. But that, yes, there needs to be changes, but the hope that I have is, like Deacon was saying, like, in Jesus Christ, like, he's already won, like we're just trying to pick ourselves up, every time we fall. But the other members of the council, they're wonderful, wonderful individuals who just have a great passion and a great heart for Jesus and for kind of doing our best to bring down racism in the diocese. That sounds really intense. Racism is never going to go away.
A high bar.
Yeah, well, okay.
The rest of the advisory council is like, wait.
Guys, racism.
Ending racism.
it's never actually going to fully go away as long as there's sin in the world. Okay.
Exactly. Like all other sin.
But, we can evangelize. We can bring Jesus to the world. Come on.
That we can do. I think everyone's with you on that. So I'm thinking through also resources. So people that are listening and they want to read more, think more about this. One document that they could look to is the pastoral letter that the U.S. bishops put out, Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love. Was there anything in that letter that you all, that kind of has stood out to you all and would maybe entice someone that's listening to give it a read?
Oh, man, Deacon's looking at me. I brought it with me.
Oh, you came equipped.
I did.
No ambush questions here.
No, and I have notes on here, Billy. So first of all, I do think it is worth reading.
Yeah.
Because while, basically racism is bad. We know that.
Yeah.
And they have some points in there. I would encourage everyone to read it just to kind of, and go through it with a red pen, underline those things that stick out to you. And maybe, if you're in a different part of the diocese, like, what are things that stick out to you that you're like, I agree with this, or I don't agree with this, or this is an issue that I see. So I think there were some good points for reflection in there.
Yeah.
But I also think that as any person that reads it is going to take something a little bit different from it. So I don't think there's like a general thing, because it basically is, racism is bad, and here are things to reflect on. So everyone go read it and reflect on it.
Yeah, and there'll be something that stands out to you to reflect
and then
on.
let your pastor know.
Yeah.
If, and he can pass it along to bishop or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That feedback's important that you're mentioning too. The advisory council is looking for that. So if you want to offer feedback through your pastor is a good way. Deacon, anything?
And I think one of the things that I got out of it was that it mentioned like African Americans, Hispanics, indigenous people. So it talks about all the different races kind of coming together as one. And I think that's crucial. And it also emphasized the fact with the chapter that we should all together walk humbly with God.
Yep.
I mean, I love that.
That's our bishop's motto.
Yeah, right? We're like, hold on.
Wait a minute.
It's like, but and it talks about with justice and stuff like that. But in justice, we owe it to one another to walk with one another because we're made for love.
Yeah.
And and I think that was the key thing. And I'm, like I said, I'm very relational. So, I was happy to be able to see that. It was like, we're calling all people together to walk humbly together towards the Father who's made a little mansion for us up in.
And you've got some show and tell here.
Yes.
You got a book you're recommending?
Yes.
All right. Let's take a look.
Which,
on Augustus Tolton. Yeah.
Yes. So this is a great book by Deacon Harold Burke Sivers. He's a brother deacon, so I love that, and I'm not just giving the deacon promotion here, but
you're making a commission.
But one of the things is he went through a lot of tough times as one of the nation's first black priest, but he shows us how to deal with racism. He didn't become bitter. He actually used it to motivate him to love the flock.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do. We have to use any slights as a motivation to love others.
Yeah.
To say, and this is a quote from not Father Augustus Tolton, but St. John of the Cross. He says, "Where there is no love, put love, and there you will draw love out." Whenever there's an absence of an evil, as St. Paul would say, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Put in more good. If you see there's hatred, make it your mission, your point to put in love. Where you see there's stuff that's hurt, try to heal it. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think Father Augustus Tolton did an exemplary job of that. He really brought the country together.
It's an incredible witness of faith. And when you think about what especially African Americans went through at that, in that time period, and to overcome that and to come from that history of it too. But like you said, not bitter, but joyful and moving forward. Knew what was unjust, didn't accept things as they were. I mean, that's not what peace is all about, just accepting it. But really having such a passionate heart for Christ and the faith and move forward. Are there any books, resources, or anything like that you would recommend?
Yeah, so we were laughing about this beforehand. So I did not bring my book for show and tell. But so mine's not really about an individual person. Like, definitely read the lives of the saints. Josephine Bakhita, she was not American, obviously, but she was somebody that overcame slavery and just had a huge forgiveness and love of the Lord. But my book recommendation is actually Searching for and Maintaining Peace by Father Jacques Philippe.
Okay.
Because just in terms of the conversation of racism and, just we're in a political everything's intense right now. And if we're not able to engage these conversations from a place of peace, not everything's peaceful, but real peace, the peace that only comes from Christ, then we're not going to be able to fully have those conversations, to be able to hear, to be able to dialogue. So I'm rereading it now for the fourth time, and while it's not specifically race related, it's such a beautiful spiritual work to help with that heart work. What was the title again? Searching for and Maintaining Peace by Father Jacques Philippe.
Very good. Because peace is not ignoring the storm. It's peace despite the storm, right? It's a calm despite what's happening.
It's not ignoring everything. It's being able to face it, with that courage and just the peace of heart that, Jesus, he's got it.
Yeah. He's got it. That's a
great
quote.
Tell our teams he's got it. Don't worry about it.
Jesus has got it.
When I die, I want that on my tombstone, okay? Jesus got it. Happy All Souls Day, everyone.
Anything that I missed? Anything we didn't discuss that you feel like needs to be brought up before we conclude here?
Yeah, I would just say this, that one more thing that I would say that we should think about is Jesus says, like, I have come so that you may have life and have it in its fullest or in abundance. And that means actually like putting on the mind of Christ. So I think also we have to be aware of what's called like cognitive distortions. And that means like overgeneralizing. Like, say, for example, if I tripped over a desk when I was little, and then I think, oh, okay, now every time I walk by a desk, I'm going to trip. That same thing, like that thing is like, yeah, if we've had a bad racial experience or interracial interactions and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that now every time we have an interracial experience, it's going to be bad or it's going to be malicious. I think that's so important because, again, if you see the evil and you miss the person, you're never going to find Christ. And that's where the peace comes from. So, I mean, we have to be able to not just say there like, oh, yeah, you know, all people are this, all people are that. No, that person has been put in your life by God, and he wants you to connect with him. And so we have to make our question, not are you racist or are you not racist, but can I love you? How can I love you? That's what I think has to be the foundation.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that response also goes to, you know, any kind of major hot button issue that comes up, you know.
That's very true.
But I think what I would add to that is, you know, in the Gospels, you know, in the Apostle, you know, maybe Deacon, you would know the chapter and the verses, okay? You're my backup. But
don't show off, Deacon. Let her talk.
So, you know, when the apostles look at our Lord and they're like, man, we tried to get this demon out of this girl, and this is my, okay? We tried to get the demon out of this girl, we couldn't do it. And our Lord's like, guys, the only way that this kind can leave is by prayer and fasting.
I love it.
Which one's that?
I love it. I love it. I know it's the daughter of Nain. I think it's in John, but yeah.
Okay, but I think, you know, when it comes to this type of stuff, like, we cannot overestimate or underestimate. What am I trying to say? Anyway, the power of prayer and fasting is so important. Yeah. So, you know, we're, as Catholics, we're called to pray and to fast, but are we doing it with intention? And so, like, yeah, we can fast from, you know, don't eat meat on Fridays during Lent, but we're also invited to fast in general every Friday, or fast before Mass, but like, maybe is there something extra, you know? Yeah. And, you know, can you offer that, whether it's like no cream in your coffee for the rest of the year, for healing for, you know, your family, in your relationship with your spouse, your children, your next door neighbor who you've never had a conversation with, and maybe you guys are different races and there's been a lot of like prejudice. You know, what are those things that we can do? Praying rosary, you know, praying divine mercy. The Lord is good and he is merciful, staying close to the sacraments. I mean, really, it needs to go back to that, because our Lord, you know, he says it straight up in the Gospels, you know, like some things just, you need the extra oomph, and that's prayer and fasting. Yeah.
Wow, these are the messages everyone that's thinking about this issue needs to hear. Thank you so much for everything that you have offered here and that you will continue to offer through this advisory council that the bishop set up. So I think we're all very, you know, joyful that it's going to, you know, be productive, and that you all are going to have great insights for the bishop and how we can do better and be better.
Just pray for us. That's what we ask.
We
Just
will.
Pray for us. We're praying for everybody.
We certainly will. But again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You're listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that inspire, educate, and inform about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.